Hi, this is Jen Rubin, and this is Jen Rubin's Green Room. Hanukkah is behind us. Christmas is ahead of us. If you haven't done your shopping, get out and do it. And the good news is things will not be as expensive as you might imagine because inflation, that's right, inflation seems to finally be leveling off. The big economic news we got this week is not only did the Fed not raise interest rates, they promised next year 3 cuts. And that sent the markets booming to an all-time high. Remember how Trump used to brag? The stock market was never higher than under my presidency. Wrong. It's higher under Biden's. And that, coupled with the low unemployment numbers, coupled with the high wages, the growth in wages, means that not only are more people employed, the economy is humming along, but on average, people are making a lot more vis-a-vis their expenses than they used to. Now, I know you've been told the opposite, that people are not getting their wages to keep up with inflation. Not true anymore. And there are a couple analyses out there. One says you're about $1,000 ahead of where you were at the beginning of the pandemic. Another says you're about $3,500. But that is right. Your wages are now outpacing your expenses. Part of the reason is lowering gas prices, but overall, the economy seems to be getting that soft landing that we were told was impossible. We were told by Republicans, of course, we were told by the press, it was going to be recession all the way. And I think it will eventually come to the point where even the ordinary person who's been grousing the average news report that has been grousing down in the dumps will recognize that this has been a remarkable economic recovery. And I think Biden is responsible in 2 ways. First of all, he backed up the Fed. It is not so long ago that you remember Donald Trump wheedling and needling and pressuring the Fed to keep interest rates low. Biden didn't do that. To the contrary, he reappointed Powell and he backed them up as a way to, the only way really, that they were going to clamp down on inflation. And the second thing is that he simultaneously put together a great fiscal program that kind of kept everything afloat. Not only the American Rescue Plan, but the infrastructure plan, the CHIPS plan, so that there was enough boost in the economy that despite lowering interest rates, we were having enough money coursing through the economy. There was a tick up in productivity. And so things kind of seem to be working out. I know it's hard to be optimistic, but on balance, I think that is what has happened. You can either blame presidents for a bad economy or say they have no role in the economy. But if you're going to blame them, you also have to credit them. And in this case, I think Biden actually does deserve a good deal of the credit. Now, meanwhile, at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue, the shit show continues. These people have, at least for now, left town not having finalized an aid package to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, not working out all of the spending bills that will be needed to continue to fund the budget beyond the last continuing resolution. They are not doing their jobs. Now, on the positive side, George Santos is gone, and of course, my Kevin McCarthy is gone. He gave his farewell address and good riddance. Never, I think, has someone so abjectly failed in his life's ambition, which was to become speaker, to become a great speaker. And he was a cruddy speaker. He barely held on to his job for 9 months. He leaves in disgrace, having accomplished absolutely nothing. And it just goes to show sucking up to Trump only gets you so far. But what about Congress? And more importantly, what about our allies? Well, we did pass and it went to the president's desk, a defense appropriations bill. But the additional money specially needed for those 3 countries I mentioned, Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, are not yet solved. The Republicans want to force the president to sign on to a immigration plan, which we don't exactly know what they want, and I'm not sure they know what they want in there. But let me suggest that there may be a way out of this. Biden takes a lot of guff from the left wing of his party that really doesn't like immigration reform without a permanent resolution of the Dreamers issue, without a increase in legal immigration. They're very much opposed to a pure border security concept. On the other hand, Biden takes a lot of guff, not only from Republicans, but really all Americans who see the chaos at the border. It is probably the biggest unresolved domestic policy program or problem of his presidency. So how about this? They pass a bill that funds these three important allies and also has a lump of spending in there for the border. Biden can then turn to his left wing and say, hey, they made me do it. I had to sign on to the border in order to save democracy in Ukraine, in order to keep Israel afloat, in order to make sure that the Chinese don't grab Taiwan. And the Republicans can say to their right-wing base that isn't in favor of supporting democracy, hey, all right, we had to give aid to Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan, but look, we got border security. And those sorts of arguments are what makes for deals. Now, as we sit here today on Friday, I cannot guarantee that that is going to be the case, but at least you could see through that that might be a possible resolution of this. And if so, I think it would be pardon the expression, a coup for Biden. He will have gotten through a full calendar year with a hostile, incompetent Republican House without shutting down the government, without defaulting on the debt, and be able to say he kept these democracies afloat. Let's talk about those democracies and the war. Things are not going as optimistically as we would like in Ukraine. Russia is not good at some things. They're not particularly sophisticated in terms of their military-industrial complex, but they know how to throw bodies and they know how to throw dumb bombs at the other side. And right now, they are armed to the teeth and continuing to do just that. Throw bodies, throw dumb bombs at Ukraine. And Ukraine is running out of stuff. They really are. Their front lines are getting low on ammunition. They need more weapons. They need more ammunition. And we are no longer at the point in which we can be extremely optimistic about an offensive by Ukraine. To the contrary, right now, if you had to say, well, who at this point looks like they have an easier shot at toppling the other, you'd have to go with Russia. But of course, we can reverse that. That does not need to be the future. We can help Ukraine help itself by doing the right thing, by increasing aid and by getting our allies to increase aid and making it clear that this is a priority. Unfortunately, the Republicans have given Putin the idea, probably correctly, that a year from now, he might be able to just snatch Ukraine for free. Because if the Republican Congress isn't going to fund Ukraine, and if the orange man is going to get into office and wants to hand Ukraine on a silver platter to Putin, that's exactly what's going to happen. So I would suggest that the next month or so is absolutely critical. And remember what is at stake. If Putin grabs Ukraine, what's to keep him from grabbing the other parts of the former Soviet Union, the other parts of Eastern Europe, the Baltic states? Ukraine has essentially been fighting the war against Russia on behalf of Europe and on behalf of democracies. The least we can do is give them a hand, don't you think? Now we turn to Israel. The pause in the fighting that allowed us to get a little bit more than 100 hostages out broke down for a reason. And that reason is Hamas was unwilling to allow the remaining women and children to go. We now have a pretty good idea why. The hostages who have been released, the hostage families, are now beginning to tell us of the conditions under which these people were held. Many, we are told, were subject to sexual abuse during captivity. Others had medical treatment. Others are having emotional problems, in large part because some of them may have been drugged by Hamas. the entire world should be screaming at the top of their lungs, this is a war crime. This is unacceptable. The Red Cross should insist upon getting in to see these people. But of course, what we get on the front pages of the American papers is nothing but shots of Gaza and the Gaza rubble. Now, before you leap and say you don't care about the Gaza children, au contraire, we do. And the reason that there is such suffering, the reason that so many children have died, whether you think the number is 20,000 or 15,000, it's because Hamas waged a brutal attack on civilians in Israel and then went and hid behind the skirts of women and children back in Gaza. And every victim that you see is the direct consequence of that. Now, the administration has been pressuring Israel to be more precise in their fighting. And quite frankly, when they were fighting in the north, there was somewhat of a gap between aspirations and delivery. But since the pause ended and since the IDF has gone into the southern part of Gaza, you have seen much less of the high volatile bombing. And that's because they're in an urban environment. They are like we were in Fallujah and other cities in Iraq, going door to door, going house to house, battling for control of those tunnels. And this has not been, frankly, recognized by Israel's critics. You wouldn't expect them to. But in fact, they are conducting a more precise kind of warfare against Hamas. They also agreed to open up a second crossing to get much needed humanitarian aid. So that is a positive outcome. But you can see that increasingly President Biden is stepping up the public criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu. He has made clear that he wants this to not turn into a massacre of even more civilians. He is increasing the pressure to be careful and precise about their military actions. He is much more vocal in terms of the day after. He has been very adamant that we should not have a reoccupation on a permanent basis by the IDF in Gaza, which was the state of affairs before the Israelis, by the way, voluntarily withdrew. And that was what, of course, allowed Hamas into Gaza. He has also been clear that we need concrete steps towards some kind of two-state solution. And that is not going to happen overnight. There is major work to be done. We're going to have a Marshall-type plan for the rebuilding of Gaza. You have to completely reform and rehabilitate the Palestinian Authority in order to make it a respected, governing, capable body. And quite frankly, you're going to have a change of government in Israel. And the latter is not going to happen because we say that we don't like Bibi's policies. It's going to happen because his prime ministership is a debacle. Having promised that only he could keep Israel safe, he presided over the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. His standing in the public has gone through the floor. Last time I checked, it was, if the elections were held today, as they like to say, his Likud party would get something like 18 seats. By far, the biggest plurality would go to Benjamin Gantz, who is in the opposition, who's a former general. So a lot of things will have to change in order to make progress. And perhaps the changing of the government, if you will, or the governing people, both on the side of the PA and on the side of Israel, will accelerate and help some kind of more permanent resolution of the problem. Now, the last issue that's sort of emerged as a tension point in public between the U.S. administration and Israel is the duration of the war. For understandable reasons, the Biden administration, wants things to wrap up as quickly as possible. If this goes on month after month, the hue and cry from the world community is going to be overwhelming, and the chances of survival for those hostages goes down substantially. So they have had some public discussion. At one point, Israel seemed to indicate that they had months to go. That was later qualified and said that, no, we're really down to a few more weeks, and then there may be some mop-up work to do, but the heavy fighting should be over in a few weeks. We'll see if that is the case. If so, that would be at least some relief from the incessant criticism that Israel is getting and that Biden is getting. And we can move on to the next stage, which is the rebuilding and the really complete reconstruction of Gaza. And that would certainly be a positive bit of news. So the president is not going to get any kudos from either people who are making excuses for Hamas or from people who are friends of Israel. And that's because he's trying to walk a line. He's trying to do multiple things at the same time. He's trying to help Israel defend itself, but defend itself in a way that he can defend. In other words, one that complies with international law and American public standards. And that is critical information. Now, there is another small ray of hope. We are beginning to see within Israel a sentiment that maybe they don't have to fight to the last Hamas terrorist. Perhaps there is a way of resolving this that does not require the very, very extensive process of getting rid of every single bomb, every single tunnel, every single fighter. And there's actually a precedent for this. In 1982, Yasser Arafat was holed up in Lebanon together with some of his fighters. And they worked out a very, I think, measured solution, which was he was going to escape with a group of his closest fighters, and that would help end the war in Lebanon. And you can imagine a similar sort of resolution here, that at some point Israel says, we have destroyed 90% or 95% of the structure, of the physical infrastructure of Hamas. We have killed thousands of their fighters. We have either killed, isolated, or forced into exile most of their top leaders. We will declare victory. We will require any remaining Hamas people to evacuate, in essence, surrender and leave. They can go to God knows where they want to go. They can go back to Iran. They can go to Lebanon, wherever. And we will get back in whatever condition they are, the remaining hostages. This is not a completely pie in the sky resolution. There's a group of about 500 former Israeli intelligence and military officers who have proposed exactly that. Michael Oren, who was Bibi's former ambassador to the United States, has suggested something along those lines. So it is not impossible, and that would certainly speed up the timeline and certainly bring an end to this horrific war. So once again, we can say there's good news on the economy, on the wonderful presence of an administration that is competent, that is decent, and that is advancing American interests. But obviously, two wars raging and raging in the world, and the presence of a political party that has, for all intents and purposes, decided they want an authoritarian dictator as their nominee. We don't see any evidence that Donald Trump's lead is diminishing in the Republican Party, and time, yes, is running out. We're only 4 or 5 weeks now from the Iowa caucuses when it all begins. And I have yet to see a candidate emerge that has the wherewithal to take him on and substantially cut into that advantage. And we are left with the very scary phenomenon that we will be making a choice in November of 2024 between dictatorship and democracy. And the sad, sad reality is that tens of millions of people prefer the dictatorship. And that is a sobering bit of news for a country that has always prided itself on its support of the Constitution, on our democratic principles, on fidelity to the law. There are millions of people who have checked out and who say, nah, I just want what I want. I want a champion. I want someone to go after my enemies. I want someone to tell those people they can't come into America. And that's a difficult problem that is not going to get resolved by a single election. God willing, Trump will lose, and a good deal of his compatriots will lose. But we're still left with those tens of millions of Americans who have somehow decided democracy is a failure, and they want an America that is run by white Christians who are going to boss around the rest of us. And that's the ongoing battle. That's the battle for the soul of America. That's the battle that we're going to have going into 2024 and beyond. So enjoy your holidays, but stay strong because the battle goes on, and next year may be the most consequential year in American history. So if you like this program, please tell your friends. They can find Jen Rubin's Green Room on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever they get their podcasts. Bye-bye.